All right. We are live. Welcome back to Reasoned Answers.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Today, we're going to be looking at a video that YouTube recommended me called Proving Islam as a Revert in 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Interestingly, we already have 3 dislikes on this video before I even started. I think that might be the most, or tied for the most anyway, that I've had in a very long time. It seems that Muslims really do not want me to review this video. I don't know why. I mean, if this video does what it claims to do, then they should be very eager for us to take a look at it and convert to Islam or revert to Islam. Nina says, it's fine. Don't be scared. You know, you want to add 30 minutes more. I did not change the start time. I was not late. I simply abrogated the start time or caused it to be forgotten and replaced it with one similar to or better than it. Get your information correct. Phil says dogs are family, and Muhammad Hijab would definitely agree with that.
Seriously, I want to have sex with you, dog. How?
So we're going to be looking at this video today. Should be a very interesting watch, I'm sure. I have not watched any of it. You'll be getting my live reaction. I saw maybe like the first 2 seconds, 3 seconds, something like that, just from clicking on it to load it up. But otherwise, I have not watched this video. It has a couple 100,000 views. The individual who posted this posted it about 6 months ago. He has 58,000 subscribers to his channel now. Muslims seem to think this is definitely something very good to celebrate. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'll share my screen. Hey, wait a minute. What is this? This isn't the video that we're supposed to be watching. Okay. Seems I have started a new channel. If you haven't seen that yet, I'll post a link to the video that I posted there in the chat now. Go ahead and take a look at that. It is a short. It's only about 20-25 seconds long. So you should have, I don't mind if you jump off this video and take a look at that and get some good laughs before we get started. The new channel is called Proof Texted. It will be a clips channel. Funny things that happen on stream taken out of context is the idea. Now, whether or not they're actually funny, I'll let you be the judge of that. Nadir, can we change the topic? Ahmed is still around. Absolutely. Nadir will be around until the day that he dies or the Dajjal comes. So probably till the day he dies, or at least his health deteriorates to the point where he is no longer interested in doing this, because there is no way, I don't think, that he could be delusional enough to think that he'll ever have an audience, so he does it for other reasons. Damas Thebes has become a Reasoned Answers channel member. Thank you very much for that.
Who ate the apple? You ate the apple. The whole apple. Yes, the whole apple. You ate it. But a small seed, you left it. You put it back into the earth. What happened? Allah, through His power, caused that to grow and to give you how many apples? Thousands.
Thousands of apples coming your way due to your support for this channel. Phil says the whole apple? Yes, the whole apple. Not just part of it. Although you didn't eat the seeds, which are technically part of the apple. So I'm not quite sure, actually. All right, so let's get to the actual video here.
If I show
we got this video.
you this painting.
Yeah. You can show us the painting in a second. Proving Islam in 9:29 minutes as a revert. This is the video we're going to be reviewing today. Like I said already, I have not watched this clip other than a few seconds like it auto-playing just now did. It has 329,000 views in 6 months, 34,000 likes. It seems that Muslims are quite interested in this particular clip. Now, I don't want to be skeptical here, but I do notice that this individual is a white male, and that from that brief amount of speaking we heard, he
Who ate the apple?
has an American accent. So I don't want to make any speculation, but I think that Muslims are probably globbing onto this guy because of who he is more than what he says in the video. But you never know. We'll see what he has to say here in a minute. On he has pinned this comment that says many scientific miracles like Big Bang, expanding space, blah, blah, blah. Those are supposed to be the same thing, just so you know. As a born Muslim, every time I watch Muslim revert videos, it always brings me closer to Islam. I have just recently converted to Islam and was surprised at how well made this video was. Super fire. The Quran is so beautiful. Alhamdulillah. I'm an ex-atheist, born into a non-religious family. In my teens, I started investigating various religions. Out of them all, Islam was the only one that made me question things and be like, okay, maybe there's some truth in this whole God thing. Soon afterwards, I took my Shahada. I'm in my 30s now and still feel I could not follow any religion except Islam. And so on and so forth. All right, lots of comments, lots of people loving this video. So we should have some very good content here today. This is the proof. The proof, you see? Perhaps. All right. Make this full screen. And let's dive right in. Let's see what this individual has to say. Actually, real quick.
If I showed you this painting and told you that ink casually...
Lorenzo Hamza. Somehow I doubt that's his real name. That'd be quite strange if he had the name Hamza and converted to Islam. But that's what he's going by, so we'll call him Lorenzo. I wanted to see what his name was. Not to be confused with the demon-possessed Lorenzo that used to call in here. This is the sane, maybe, Lorenzo.
If I showed you this painting and told you that ink casually fell onto the canvas and made it, would you believe me?
I would not.
If I were you, I wouldn't. For the simple reason that you would come to the conclusion that a painter must have made it.
Wow, everyone, I'm ready. I'm ready to convert to Islam. A painter must have a painting. This is the proof of Islam, you see.
Now, if we think about the universe, though, don't you think that coming to the conclusion that the...
Yeah, he does. He is quite likely English as opposed to American. I only heard a couple words when I said he had an American accent. But either way, right? Either way, point is he's a Westerner. He's a white male Westerner, i.e. the perfect convert to Islam.
The universe was created by randomness sounds completely absurd. Now, obviously, there is a chance for ink to actually fall onto a canvas and make such a painting, but it is so slim that you would never even come to such a conclusion, would you? In the Quran...
All right, so 36 seconds in, he's given, by way of analogy, he's given an argument that the creation, the universe must have a creator. This is obviously a generic argument for God, not an argument for Islam, but that's okay, right? Maybe he wants to start by saying there's a God and then he can get to Islam later on. That's a perfectly acceptable way to argue. So far, so good. Sheikh GPT says paintings are haram, and that is not correct. images of living creatures are haram. That painting only had trees in it. I mean, yes, trees are technically living, but normally it would only apply to human beings and possibly animals. So I think he's okay there. I don't think that he has made a mistake, right? I don't think that he has committed a grievous sin in his newfound religion. As interested, images are haram, but it's images, strictly speaking, it's images of living creatures. So there you go. If only if your name is Jackson Pollock, can you just throw paint at a canvas and create a painting?
Allah challenges us with three simple questions. Were they created by nothing? Were they the creators of themselves? Or were they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Now,
okay, so the Quran poses this challenge. Allegedly, he didn't give a verse, but fair enough, right? Quran poses challenge. Were you created by nothing? Did you create yourself? Or do you have a creator? Again, not an argument for Islam. At best, a vague argument for God.
if we take a look at the first question, we can both agree that something cannot come from nothing, as it does.
Well, I might agree with that. However, the standard atheist position would, in fact, be that the universe came from nothing. So just stating it doesn't really argue for the point. But again, I'm largely in agreement so far. You just haven't begun to make an argument for Islam yet.
Doesn't logically make sense. Also, to be the creators of ourselves, we should have been born even before we were born, which also doesn't make sense as it's impossible. And to be the
Now, strictly speaking, here, I hate to be pedantic, but in fact, you could have a pre-existence and then cause your own birth. That's not a logical contradiction here. So he has actually smuggled an assumption in that you don't have an existence before the time you are born. He really should have said conceived, however, because you obviously do exist before you're born at the very least. And yes, John, I forgot to make this comment at the beginning. I don't know how I managed to forget, but is this a coincidence that his video is 9 minutes and 29 seconds long, or is he intentionally alluding to Surah 9, verse 29, fight the unbeliever in the name of Islam? Good question.
creators of the heavens and the earth, it also implies that we were born 20 billion years ago, which also is quite impossible.
Again, not a logical contradiction. There is nothing about logically speaking, there's nothing that prevents a being from being 20 billion years old, although he's way off on the age of the universe, since the consensus age of the universe is currently about 13 billion years old.
So why do we think we're smart enough to come to the conclusion that there is no God? Now that we've understood that a creation needs a creator, who created the creator? Such question implies by definition that the creator isn't God, as God cannot be created as he's always existed and will always exist. A theory.
So, right, sort of. There has to be a eternal being, right? There has to be a eternal something, logically speaking, if all effects have causes, which again he hasn't argued for, he's just assumed. But it wouldn't actually have to be a personal creator necessarily. It could be an immaterial force. The argument for God being a personal being comes from observation of the universe, not the mere fact that there is a universe. So he's trying to make an argument that I would agree with, but he's not doing all that great a job of it.
The theory of the creation of the universe is the multiverse theory, which implies that a universe was created by another universe, which was created by another universe, which was created by another universe. Such theory is illogical because if we have an infinite regression of dependent things being dependent on each other for their existence, nothing starts and nothing ends, so nothing exists.
So he misstated what a multiverse theory would propose. It would propose, it doesn't really, it's the purpose of the multiverse proposition is not to get around the creation of the universe, because it, as he correctly points out, it doesn't really help with that, but rather the purpose of the multiverse theory is to get around the suggestion that what we see in this universe is extremely improbable. So you suggest that there are an infinite number, or essentially infinite number, of different universes. Most of them are completely empty with no matter. They certainly no complex matter, and we're just think that this one seems really unusual, really special, really unlikely, really improbable, because if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be here. So that's actually the purpose of it. But there is, of course, absolutely zero evidence of this. It is a complete and total conjecture, a way to get around aspects of what atheists would argue for, but without any evidence whatsoever. And he is correct that there are logical problems with an infinite regress. There has to be an absolute beginning, assuming that there is time and matter now.
Well, now you could say, okay, I agree with you, God does exist. But how do we know that there isn't more than one God? Let's take this.
All right, so it looks like he's going to argue first for the existence of God, about 2 minutes for that. Then he's going to argue for monotheism, maybe another minute or two on that. And then hopefully the rest of the time he argues for Islam, because right now I think he could have done better, but we're basically in agreement.
This example. Let's say you were in a car with your friend and you both had a steering wheel. Only two things can happen. You either both agree on steering the wheel in the same direction, which demonstrates that you are both dependent on each other, or you both go in the opposite direction, meaning that one of you overpowers the other.
Okay, so that was a really terrible analogy. In his analogy, there are way, way, way more than two possibilities, right? He says the only two possibilities is that you both try to move the steering wheel and you move the same direction, or you move different directions and one overpowers the other. Okay, well, one person could not do anything. Both people could not do anything. They could have a discussion and come to agreement. They could take turns steering the steering wheel. They could apply equal force in opposite directions and nothing happens, and so on. So this is a really, really terrible analogy. I'm sorry, but this is a really terrible analogy. And apparently this is the analogy he's chosen to prove monotheism, when in fact he's left out numerous possibilities in his example, which then when he tries to, by analogy, get to God, those same possibilities are not going to have been ruled out, which is a shame, because obviously I agree with monotheism, so I would be inclined to agree with him, but he is doing a really terrible job so far at arguing for monotheism. And give me 1 second here. A cat just arrived, so I'm starting up the cat game. Get that added to your screen. We have Artemis joining us today. Thousands of possibilities. Indeed. Indeed.
Meaning that the one that got overpowered cannot be God, as God is omnipotent. So we can agree that there can only be one person driving the car. And if you think about,
so that's really bad. You can't just define God as omnipotent, right? I mean, what does that even mean in the context of his analogy? So he says, one got overpowered by the other, therefore it couldn't have been God. Well, he left out the possibility that they apply equal force in the opposite direction and various other things that I talked about. But why can there not be a supernatural being, i.e., what we would call God, something that is beyond the physical laws of nature as we know them, that is not all powerful? That's not an argument. I'm sorry, but that's not an argument.
a proof that there is indeed only one God is that the laws of physics are the same. Gravity is still the same, and the sky is always blue. Now,
What? What? So because gravity doesn't change, which by the way is probably not completely correct, but because the physical laws don't change, even though many of them do change over time, therefore that means that there must be one God. So Nina says rewind. So let's get this again.
Person driving the car. And if you think about it, a proof that there is indeed only one God is that the laws of physics are the same. Gravity is still the same, and the sky is always blue. Now,
okay, first of all, why did he say the sky is always blue? That's not a physical law or true, right? Obviously, sometimes the sky is, for example, black in the middle of the night. God is real because we have gravity. Checkmate, atheists. Well, actually, he's not arguing for God anymore. Monotheism is true because we have gravity. Checkmate, polytheists. That's actually his argument here. So, you know, saying gravity is too imprecise. So gravity is different location you're living somehow. So there is a gravitational force constant, which is really the mass and the distance of two objects exert gravitational pull on one another. So if, for example, you're on the moon's much smaller than the Earth is further away from you. So the gravitational pull towards the moon is much less. It's still stronger than the gravitational pull of the Earth on you while you're on the moon, but technically the Earth is having gravitational pull on you, and you are having gravitational pull on the Earth as well, by the way. However, gravitational laws break down at the microscopic level, or the subatomic level, I should say, to be more precise. They also arguably break down at the scale of the universe. Gravitation, not so much, but other physical constants have changed according to our understanding of the laws of, uh, according to our physical models that are the consensus models. Certain things have changed over time. So it's not very good, right? Not a very good analogy whatsoever. And why he said the sky is always blue is just beyond stupid, because it isn't blue. That's not really a property of the sky. It looks blue because of the way it refracts light, but it doesn't always reflect light in such a way that it looks blue. As people have pointed out, sometimes it looks red or orange or yellow, or during the night, pitch black. I mean, this is just such a stupid thing to say.
and we've agreed that the universe to exist needs a creator, and we also agree that that creator is one. But why should I choose a religion?
I don't agree with that, because you just made a really bad analogy, and you only ruled out one possibility, that that a weaker God pulling in the opposite directions exists. You didn't even address the possibility that they're working in tandem, that the two gods are both have the same will and are doing the same thing. Man,
Why should I be restricted by a specific way of life? If you think about it, life without direction, not only is it terrifying, but it's chaotic. We can all agree that we do need direction to live, which is proven by the fact that laws exist in different countries. But
oh man, not just one non sequitur after another. So the fact that we had human beings have laws proves that we need direction. No, it doesn't prove that whatsoever. In fact, there are places in the world with effectively no laws, and human beings still exist in those places. If you were to travel to the moon, there'd be no laws there, but that wouldn't mean you've ceased to exist, or that you die because you have no direction. Nor, I mean, you could argue that human beings choose to have laws because of part of their nature, but you can't argue anything about human nature from laws. It's going the wrong direction. Oh, plus, He said the opposite, or he said if we didn't have direction, things would be chaotic. Yeah, that's kind of the definition of chaos, is lack of direction. However, that doesn't prove that human beings need direction. Just saying it would be chaos. Yeah, it would. But so what? Yeah, exactly, Potato. You see the problem here. Human created legal systems prove that we need laws. Yeah, the only thing they prove is that we have laws. I mean, you could make a weak argument that since nearly every society of human beings throughout human history has created laws, that this is something very fundamental to human nature, and it would be a weak argument because it would be an argument from observation rather than a logical argument. But that's not at all what he argued, right? He just said, we have laws, therefore countries have laws, therefore human beings need direction, which apparently is going to get us to Islam. I think, maybe. I don't know. I mean, every religion has laws or guidelines. So what is that supposed to mean?
But the problem with human laws in most countries is that they constantly change, which proves that humans do not know what is 100% wrong or right. So,
Okay, again, another failed logical argument. Human laws change, therefore human beings don't know what is right and wrong. No. Here's another reason that has absolutely nothing to do with right and wrong why a law might change. New technology is invented. Laws need to be put in place to govern that new technology. Does that prove that human beings didn't know what was right and wrong in the past, and now they've come to that conclusion? No. He's also making the assumption that all laws are based on moral principles, which isn't the case. Many laws exist for practical reasons. Now, I do agree that human beings don't have a perfect sense of morality. There's nothing in Islam to get them that. There is actually something in Christianity to get them that. It's called the fall, where we are corrupted and imperfect and cannot have a perfect relationship with God, cannot perfectly follow his moral laws. But he didn't argue for that by saying laws change, nor is it something he can get from Islam.
so how can we be sure that the laws of our country that we are following are indeed the right ones and not the wrong ones? The only way to know if what you are following is actually 100% right is if you're following.
Okay, this is trivial, but I'm
The
Potato.
only way to know if what you are.
Why did he break 100% into 2 lines? Like someone reading these subtitles. The only way to know what you are following is actually 100% right. Why?
Are following is actually 100% right is if you're following that which God dictates, for the simple.
Again, does not follow. We're going to just keep saying this. Every single thing he says. Even when I would agree with his conclusion doesn't follow from his argument. Yeah, it's 1.00% right. So he says, right, the only way to know what is 100% right is if it comes from God. But what if your God is not 100% moral? I mean, you just assumed that God is perfectly moral. On what basis? He didn't even try. He just stated it. He just stated that God must be 100% moral. But that's not yeah, Christians would agree with that. But that's not the dominant position of religion throughout human history. A majority of human religions have felt that gods are both morally good and morally evil. That either some of the gods in a polytheistic system are good and some are evil, Or more likely, they're all complex characters with some degree of good and evil. In other words, they're just human beings with superpowers. Or, even in a monotheistic system, who's to say that God is 100% morally perfect? Now, what he should have said is that the only way you could know what is 100% moral is if there's 100% moral standard. That's what he should have actually said. And then he could have argued for God from a absolute moral standard. But apparently, that was a little too sophisticated for him. So he didn't think of properly phrasing the argument. And Villainous is, of course, correct here. It's a simple thing to be more moral than Alan. So I like to use this argument on Muslims. So I asked them if love is a moral good. And they're usually not akin, they usually haven't figured out what's going to happen here. So they will say yes. And then I show them that Allah is not all loving, therefore he is not the perfect example of that love. And then they usually take back the fact that love is a moral good because they know their God is not all loving. So Nicodemus, you missed 3 minutes and 15 seconds. This guy is named Lorenzo. He is by his own statement, he is a revert to Islam. This video that we're watching, proving Islam in 9:29 minutes as a revert, has over 300,000 views. Muslims have really gone all over this. As far as the dork, though, that might actually be me. I'm not sure, right? You might be referring to me. Maybe I'm the dork. Maybe not this guy in the video. Who knows? Anyway, so we are 3 minutes and 15 seconds into the video. So far, he has argued somewhat okay that there is a God. Then he argued terribly for monotheism. And now he's arguing terribly for an absolute moral standard. He hasn't gone to Islam yet. He hasn't even begun to attempt to get to Islam yet. But that's okay. I don't mind that, right? I wouldn't mind a Christian who argues for Christianity by starting with an argument for God and then argument for monotheism. That's fine. I'm sure at some point he will get this to Islam. So I don't have a problem with the structure of his argument. I do have a problem with the specific things he's claiming because they are non sequiturs. They are conclusions that don't follow from his premises.
Reason that God created the universe and life, which implies that he must know everything that is right and wrong, as God knows everything.
Okay, so let me rewind there.
Following that which God dictates, for the simple reason that God created the universe and life, which implies that he must know everything that is right and wrong, as God knows.
All right, well, he's smuggled in another assumption. He's smuggled in the assumption that God is all-knowing. But even if God is all-knowing, it still doesn't follow that he would have a perfect moral standard. Just because he knows what's right and wrong. See, he's actually gone this way. His terminology itself is way off, because if God knows what's right and wrong, that implies that moral good and moral evil are independent of God. They're just things that he knows. In fact, the correct formulation is that God is the definition of what is good. And evil is not an independent thing. It's just the absence of that moral good. So the way he talks about it is way wrong, right? He can't get to the conclusion that he wants to because he's not even talking about it right. But I think part of the problem is that Islam doesn't actually give him the right ingredients to come to the conclusion that he wants to come to.
Knows everything. But now that we think about it, why should God even reveal anything to humankind?
So that's actually a good question, right? Why should God reveal anything to humankind? And some people end up with this conclusion, right? They look at the physical evidence of the universe and some of the stuff that he said at the beginning, but in a much more sophisticated way. And they come to the conclusion, okay, there must be a first cause. We'll call that God, but he doesn't interact with human beings in any way. So he's going to argue, and I'll rewind a couple of seconds here per Nina, but he's going to come to some reason why God would reveal himself to the universe. And let's see if this agrees with a Christian worldview here.
Why does he need? Now that we think about it, why should God even reveal anything to humankind? Why does he need to? Let's take this example. If you go to a car dealership and you buy a car that you really want, let's say you have no clue how to drive a car and you try driving it on the first day that you bought it. Will you drive it correctly? Obviously you wouldn't. You'd probably go crashing after 5 meters of driving it. That is why an instructions manual exists, so that he who buys the car knows how to drive it. The same can go for life. If God creates life and doesn't instruct that which lives how to live properly, it wouldn't make any sense.
Oh my gosh, guys. I'm just going to sit here in silence a second. You guys just tell me all the reasons that this analogy is so horrific, so stupid, doesn't remotely get to the conclusion that he is trying to draw. I want to see. Maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I'm just crazy. And this was actually a good argument. But this is quite possibly one of the stupidest things that I have ever heard as an argument put forth for theism. Right? He's actually not arguing for Islam yet. He's arguing for revelation. So he first argued for the existence of God. Then he argued for, if we want to call it argued, for monotheism. Then he argued, again in quotes, for moral law. Now he's arguing for revelation existing. I think that's kind of a strange thing to do, to argue for revelation existing. But he's telling us that revelation must exist. So Rick Newton got part of the problem here. And there are many, many problems. So I don't expect one comment to contain them all. Rick says, so read the car's instruction manual and you know how to drive. Right. This is so bad. That's why I started laughing there. Because does anyone read the instruction manual to know how to drive? I mean, what an idiotic thing to say, right? He wants to say that because he wants to get to revelation. But that's not how human beings learn how to drive. I would doubt that there are more than a dozen people in the history of the world that have learned how to drive by reading an instruction manual on how to use a car. And instead we learn from other human beings, right? We learn by example. So that's one problem. You might accidentally take the wrong instructions manual and crash anyway. Doesn't get worse than this. Half-brain people in the comments. Smashallah. The user manual is terrible. Not every product comes with a user manual. Also, the manual isn't written for the car. Thank you. Thank you. It's such a moronic analogy. Why can't they ever do analogies proper? So there's another problem, right? Because in this example, we are the car. We're supposed to be the car, right? Because he says, well, if cars have instruction manuals, that means human beings have instruction manuals. Except for the analogy to work, we'd have to be the car. So very good job, Quran only fans. And I'm just going to move this further. Do animals have instruction manuals? Did my cat read an instruction manual when it was born to know how to behave? No, it didn't. So apparently you can have a living creature without an instruction manual. Potato Sandwich said people that buy a car aren't going to not know how to drive a car before buying it. That's not how it works. Exactly. I mean, theoretically, someone who has not yet learned how to drive can buy a car. But generally speaking, no one is going to read the instruction manual. Except like maybe rarely when they need to learn how to do something specific, like, I don't know, they need to learn how to open the hood of the car or to do an oil change or what tire pressure to keep the tires at or something like that. They're not going to read through the manual to learn how the car operates, because it operates exactly the same as every other car. There's a gas pedal, a brake pedal, and a steering wheel. And I guess the key is kind of important too, because you got to start the car. But that's all there is, and that's true of every car. It has nothing to do with the instruction manual of the car. I doubt, like I said, most people never read it. I have never read an instruction manual straight through, but I doubt very much that the instruction manual to my car tells me how to drive in any sense. Manual doesn't teach you how to drive. You can't wait till you're 18, go to the DMV, take a short written test, and get your license. Yeah, you have to demonstrate, how to drive. This guy is helping us to have more bacon by freeing his share of bacon for us. Perhaps. It's certainly possible that he still eats bacon. I mean, hey, just because you say you're a Muslim doesn't necessarily mean you follow the laws. You can buy a vehicle from a private seller who might not still have the manual. Absolutely. Men don't read manuals. It isn't an instruction manual anyway. If anything, the book left in the glove compartment for reference material, mostly for maintenance. Hey, that's exactly what I was saying earlier. So you guys got it, right? This is a terrible analogy. We are not cars. We are not being driven. There's not a manual for, I don't know, our brain to drive the rest of our body or something. I mean, this is just a really, really terrible example. You eat pig, you squeal like pig. I think that's true. I'm a perfect example of that. Do amoebas have instruction manuals? No, they don't. Does this guy need a manual for growing a beard too? I think he does, right? This is his first video that he published 6 months ago. Some degree of time after he decided to revert to Islam. I don't know. It could have been years, could have been days, who knows? But I'm pretty sure he doesn't have a beard in his latest videos either, which is haram. It is not following the Sunnah of Muhammad. So he apparently hasn't read his instruction manual all that well. And Nina points out, however, that they do have a manual on how to go to the toilet. So there's that.
But now that we've agreed that we do need an instructions manual.
No, I have not agreed that. I have not at all agreed that. Let me make the point more clear. All right, so I talked about animals, but there is absolutely no reason why God could not create human beings who are born with the knowledge of the scriptures in their mind, with a instruction manual. That is not a logical conclusion. I have other reasons to believe that God had given revelation, but not from the logical necessity of God giving revelation. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what to do. And yeah, Elongated was teasing me. So if someone said, shame on you, Elongated, well, shame on whoever said that to him, because he was joking and I understood it as a joke. I am not going to be sensitive and be like, oh, you guys hurt my feelings. I'm quitting YouTube now.
To be able to live correctly, how do we know if what we're following is the correct religion?
So he just somehow jumped from instruction manual to religion. He didn't even draw the analogy that I assumed he was drawing of revelation, because not all religions have written revelation. So apparently he doesn't even know, right? He doesn't know enough to rule out various religions. He just automatically assumes that all religions have revelation. Therefore, talking about an instruction manual is equivalent to talking about a religion. Yikes.
There are two scenarios. Scenario 1 is that all religions are false, and scenario 2 is that one out of all the religions is true.
Well, that's more or less correct.
Now, to come to the conclusion that one...
Now, it would actually be possible for two or more religions to both be correct if they both taught the same thing, and, for example, just had different practices, but they have the same theological teachings. But I'll give them this one. It's more or less true that either one and only one religion is true, or that no religion is true. I can't wait to see how he concludes that there must be a true religion, though.
That one out of all the religions is true. Now, to come to the conclusion that one of these religions has to be true means that you have to prove that its holy book, or at least its revelation, comes from God.
Okay, see, I was correct. I was correct. He actually thinks that every religion has a holy book, which is not true. That is simply not remotely true. Probably like 90-ish% of all religions ever created do not have scriptures. Nor does his conclusion, once again, he's arguing in the wrong direction, right? He's arguing, well, to conclude that a religion is true, you must conclude that its scriptures is true. That's not really the correct direction to argue. It's close enough. I think I'll just let that one pass, but it's not really logically sound.
And to prove that none of the religions are true, you would have to prove that none of the revelations are from God. We believe.
So he is correct about that. Well, sort of. That would be one way to prove that God doesn't exist. And this is what atheists usually fail to understand. They have some specific reason that they believe Christianity is false, and therefore they conclude that atheism is true. Now, if that's the method you're going to take, then you're going to have to actually disprove every single religion. He's right about that. He said that you'd have to disprove all of the revelation. That's not correct, because you actually have to disprove the tenets of the religion, not the revelation, because one, not all religions have revelation, and two, not all religions believe that revelation is the word for word dictation from God, the way that Islam does. So that's a major problem for him. But there is another possibility. An atheist could also prove atheism to be true if they had a sufficient proof that there is not God, or that God is logically impossible, or something along those lines. So he's not actually correct that that's the only way that you could prove atheism.
Believe that the Quran is the word of God for many different reasons. First of all, it's
all right. So he's laid out his principle. Again, I disagree with his principle, but we'll go ahead and grant it because it's close enough. It's reasonable. It's not logically sound, not completely and totally logically sound, but if he rephrased things a little bit, he could get it there. So I'm going to grant him that. So the rest of it, I believe, is that he's going to argue that the Quran must be the revelation from God. Now, he's going to actually have a problem, though. Even if he were somehow able to prove that the Quran is the revelation of God, that would not actually prove Islam to be true. That would only prove that what the correct interpretation of the words of the Quran is the correct religion. That would not actually get you modern Islam and all the theology in it, especially since the vast majority of the theology doesn't come from the Quran. Zakir Naik says, nerd. I'm not sure. I think he's referring to me, but he could be referring to the guy in the video. Either way, I hope you're enjoying this nerdy analysis of this guy's argument.
We believe that the Quran is the word of God for many different reasons. First of all, it's the only book that has been preserved not only in a written form, but also through memory.
Okay, so that his first reason is just flat out false. There are many texts of the ancient world. Okay, maybe not many, but there are a few texts of the ancient world where we have the autograph. We have the original copy of whatever it is, primarily letters that were written from one individual to another, also some tax records, various things, right? So we do have various documents that are definitely 100% perfectly preserved, right down to the letter, because we have the autograph. We have the very original copy of it. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, that does not describe the Quran, right? I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but I'm going to say it anyway. As we well know, there are many, many, many different Arabic Qurans. I saw one estimate that there are over 100 different Arabic Qurans. Hatun, as we well know, has tracked down 26 or 28 or 29. I'm not sure what number she's at exactly these days. Different Arabic Qurans, but in fact, there are many more. There are also statements in the Sira literature, the histories of Islam, that state that, so-and-so had a version of the Quran that disagreed on this verse. And we don't have any Qurans that disagree on that verse. So we know that that version is gone. 37. Okay, 37 at last count, according to Painted Turtle. According to, I don't want to say which scholar because I don't want to misquote, but according to one of the academic scholars of the Quran, there should be over 100. There should be something like 130, 140. I don't remember for sure which one it is, so I'm not going to speculate on that. But there should be over 100 different Arabic Qurans, which apparently means it's perfectly preserved right down to the letter in writing. Because if you have two different things, then that means there's no difference between them. Okay. But then he also states that it's been done in memory, which is just complete and total nonsense. If you look at the manuscripts of the Quran, the type of errors that one might form when writing something down from memory and when writing something down from another manuscript are different. They're not the same kind of errors. For example, when you're copying a manuscript, it's really easy to accidentally repeat a line. That would never happen if you were reciting it from memory. Yet, that's a kind of error that we see in the manuscripts. If you are writing something down from memory, it's very easy to rephrase a sentence. That's not the kinds of errors that we typically see in the manuscript tradition. So the two are not one and the same. The two being what we observe and what we would find if Muslims were writing down the Quran from memory. Now, if they have it perfectly memorized, why in the world are they relying on a manuscript, which is also apparently perfectly preserved? But why are they relying on the manuscript? Because it is much, much, much more difficult to copy one manuscript in ancient times, at least, right? They didn't have Xerox machines. It's much, much more difficult to copy a manuscript word by word than to write something down from memory word by word. So the evidence doesn't fit this. It's just a baseless assumption that the Quran is perfectly preserved, an assumption that is contradicted by the actual evidence. And yet, this is how we know that Islam is true. Problem number 3, even if this was true, it would in no way say the content is true. The words being preserved have no bearing on whether those words are true or false. It's just a totally idiotic argument. I know that it's a very important argument for Muslims, but it is totally idiotic, insanely stupid argument.
We are here to expose their lies to everybody.
Of hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world. No other religion.
Another flat out lie there, right? I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say lie because lying requires intent. He might actually believe this, but another falsity. Let's hear that again.
But also through memory of hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world.
Hundreds of millions of Muslims have not memorized the entirety of the Quran. Maybe 100 million have memorized at least one surah, but that's not the same thing as memorizing the entirety of the Quran perfectly. Yeah, ask this guy if he's memorized the Quran. I'm sure he hasn't, right? He's probably, maybe one possibility is he's working on it. Another possibility is he doesn't care. Because, I mean, let's be honest, it's actually kind of stupid to perfectly memorize the Arabic Quran if you don't speak Arabic. That would be idiotic. Like, I think that there is some benefit in memorizing Bible verses, but if you speak English, memorize them in English. If you speak Hungarian, memorize them in Hungarian. If you speak Chinese, memorize them in Chinese. Don't memorize the Koine Greek unless you speak Greek. It would be silly. And so he's way off here. There's probably only really a couple thousand people who have perfectly memorized the entirety of the Quran. For example, Zakir Naik, very well-known Muslim apologist. He is on record saying that he has only memorized a couple hundred verses. That is not the entirety of the Quran. There are 6,600 verses in the Quran, and he's memorized a couple hundred. I said Greek specifically for you, Nicodemus. I knew you'd enjoy it.
No other religion has the preservation about their holy books that Islam has for the Quran.
That again, flat out false. The book, we have the autograph, we have the original printer's copy of the Book of Mormon and the other holy books of the Mormon religion, Doctrine and Covenants and so forth. A Book of Abraham, I think. There's a fourth one, which I can't remember off the top of my head. We have the autographs. We have the original copies. They are perfectly preserved right down to the letter. In fact, you can look at the original copy and see where Joseph Smith circled things in the printer's proof and said, this is the wrong word, and corrected it to something else. So we have the original. It is not true. It's not true of Islam. And if it was true of Islam, it would not be unique to Islam.
Preservation about their holy books that Islam has for the Quran. In fact, the earliest manuscript that we have is a Birmingham parchment.
False. It's not the earliest manuscript. The Sunnah manuscript is almost certainly the earliest, but forget that. The Birmingham manuscript is 4 freaking pages. It is not the entirety of the Quran. It is 4 pages. That's not the entirety of the Quran, you genius. Plus, there are also textual variants in the Birmingham manuscript. They only point to this because it's famous because it's in the British Museum. At least that's why I think they right, as Andrew said, Birmingham is incomplete. It's 4 pages out of the whole Quran, and it confirms that the Quran is not preserved because it has textual variants. It's only 4 pages, so it doesn't have a huge number, but it has a few. And yeah, so the Sana is so to be clear, the Sana manuscript is a palimpsest, which means that there is it had a different text written on it originally. That text was erased. A new text was written, but because the ink is still in the page, using techniques of reflecting light and such, you can detect the earlier text, and nearly all scholars would say that earlier text is probably the earliest form of the Quran. Problem is, it's a massively variant from the Quran that we have today. Birmingham manuscript has a few variants. The Sana palimpsest layer has massive variants, and this is the evidence that's perfectly preserved. And to Professor Yaffel's point here, the radiocarbon dating is highly unreliable. Well, I shouldn't say highly unreliable. What people don't understand about radiocarbon dating, it's very precise given that your assumptions are correct. So there's a base set that's applied to any sample to determine the date of it. Well, the date range using that assumption starts from before the time of Muhammad and goes till sometime after, but different labs, I don't know for sure if it's this manuscript or other ones, but different labs have come to different conclusions because they made different assumptions about it. And for this reason, manuscripts are not normally dated by radiocarbon dating. They're normally dated by, I can't remember the name of the term, but the study of handwriting, right? The way, because all texts in ancient times were produced by professional scribes who were learned in a particular style, that style slowly evolved over time. So you can get a pretty good idea of when a text was written by the style of handwriting in the text. And that's the way manuscripts are usually dated, not radiocarbon dating. In fact, I've never seen biblical manuscripts dated by radiocarbon dating, but because Muslims want to have this in your face gotcha thing, they had their manuscripts dated that way.
Which dates to around the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The Quran is also the best Arabic literature to date.
Oh boy. So he said that it could be from the time of Muhammad. Yeah, it could be. It could be from earlier. It could be from later. But what would the relevance of that be? Absolutely nothing, right? No one thinks it's an autograph. No one thinks it's an original copy that came from Arabia at the time of Muhammad. Literally no one thinks that. So why is he going on about that? Because he has no clue about the actual science, most likely. I don't think he's lying. I think he just is clueless about the actual factors that go into dating a manuscript. Now, new argument that the Quran is the best Arabic literature to date, which is very strange. It's very strange that it's the best Arabic literature to date, which one is subjective, right? How do you decide if something's better or not? Well, I'm sure that if you did a survey of Muslims, the majority of them would say the Quran is the best Arabic literature ever. But so what? That doesn't prove anything. Yeah, define best. But here's the thing that I think gives a pretty clear indication that's in fact not the best literature ever written, or the best Arabic literature ever written. When people translate it, they have to put a whole bunch of words in brackets because they're missing from the original text. The original text is technically incoherent. It leaves out thoughts and expects you just to know what's going on there. Not to mention flat out grammatical mistakes that exist in the Quran, the fact that it's very boring. Like Muslims generally don't read the Quran for a reason. It's very boring and repetitive.
You know they're telling a lie. And you know they're telling a lie.
Thank you, Morgan, for telling us that very important information. It's disorganized. There is absolutely no reasonable organization. Like, what person thinks, let's arrange the surahs from longest to shortest? That sounds like the best possible way to organize the surahs. Well, that's the way the Quran's organized. So how is that the best literature ever created? I think a normal novel that has, a beginning, plot development, more plot development, character change, a climax and a conclusion, I think that that's probably a better way to organize a text. Oh, and by the way, as long as we're talking about characters, the characters in the Quran are extremely flat and boring characters. They have no dimension to them whatsoever, such that many scholars say all of these characters are just Muhammad imagining himself as different people, because they're all the same freaking character with the only exception of Jesus. Best literature ever.
And as Arabic is arguably the most eloquent language,
Arabic is arguably the most eloquent language to ever exist. Somali is arguably the most eloquent language to ever exist. Hindi is arguably the most elegant language to ever exist. He puts the word arguably in it because he knows that this is just total nonsense. One language, what is eloquent in one language is going to vary, but every person is going to have ways to elegantly express words in their own language. You can't really compare, and if you can compare, it's completely and totally subjective. There is absolutely no basis to conclude a language is more eloquent than some other language. There is some objective basis if you establish rules for determining one particular writing in one language is more elegant than another writing in that same language, but there's not even a property. It's not even a property of language to be eloquent. Like, a language is a collection of words. Words do not have eloquence. Eloquence is the way you form sentences and is dependent on the skill of the writer. It has nothing, it's not a property of language. My goodness gracious.
language to ever exist, we can also come to the conclusion that the Quran is the most eloquent literature to date.
No, we cannot come to that conclusion. I bet you have no freaking clue what Arabic even sounds like. Assuming that you are being legitimate and you just reverted to Islam in the last 6 months, I bet you don't even know what Arabic sounds like, and yet you're drawing this conclusion that it's the most eloquent language, and the Quran is the most eloquent example of it. Therefore, this must be the most eloquent literature in the history of the world. Oh my gosh.
The Quran also has scientific and historical miracles. More than 1,000 verses in the Quran are related to science.
More than 1,000 verses. More than 1,000 verses in the Quran are related to science, people. Now, I mean, that's going to depend on how you define related. If you say this describes physical reality, therefore it is related to science, you could actually say that's true. I mean, I don't know the exact count of verses, right? But I bet you at least 1,000 of the 6,600 verses in the Quran refer to physical reality. But the term science can also just be used for knowledge. It's somewhat archaic to use science in that way, but that's the primary way it was used 100 years ago, is that science was just a way of saying knowledge. So you could, like, for example, talk about the science of religion or the science of philosophy or various other things, because science was basically just a way of saying rational human knowledge. In which case, I suppose every verse of the Quran is related to science. But if he means, which is what he wants us to think he means, that 1,000 of the verses of the Quran teach scientific facts, that is utterly, totally nonsense. It is beyond ridiculous to claim that 1/6 or 1/7 of the Quran is scientific textbook. Like, I know he didn't come to this number. I'm sure he got it from some Dawa website, but I want to know how they came to this conclusion, right? How did they decide a verse is related to science or not? The only ones that are definitely not related to science are the random letters that appear as the first verse of many Qurans. First verse of many surahs, I mean. Those ones, I guess, are definitely not related to science because they're complete and total nonsense. They have no meaning whatsoever. But every other verse arguably could be related to science. Same is true of the Bible or any other book. Because if it describes physical reality in any way, it's technically related to science. Forget scientific miracle. What is a historical miracle? Well, it's a contradiction in terms, but the idea is going to be that the Quran contains correct history that couldn't possibly be known, except by definition, history could always be known. It's part of history. It happened in the past. You can know what happened in the past, at least theoretically speaking. So it's actually impossible for there to be historical miracles, but we'll get to that when he gets to actual examples. Did have a super chat from Rick Newton.
Sir, how can we contribute financially for your organization? They get in touch with me. And very easy, people know where I am. And once they get in touch with me, to contribute without causing problem, to contribute in big amounts. And many people call me for lunch, and for dinner, and for meal, and for every meal they give big amounts, alhamdulillah. So those who really want to contribute, they come and meet me.
If you want to contribute big amounts to Zakir Naik, don't worry that your credit card company automatically blocks donations to his organization because it is classified as a terrorist organization. You can just come meet him, and then you don't have to worry about that ever again. Isn't that beautiful, everyone? Isn't that beautiful? Thank you very much for your donation, Rick Newton. Rick writes, there is a climax in the Quran. Muhammad was poisoned and said that he felt like his aorta was being severed, something about a false prophet. So in the Quran, just to be clear, in the Quran it says Allah says, if you were a false prophet, I would surely seize you by your aorta and cut it off. Then in the Hadith, so not part of the Quran, Muhammad is poisoned and he says, I feel as if my aorta is being cut. Is this Muhammad's way of admitting to his brain dead followers that he is a false prophet and he feels guilty about deceiving them his entire life? Perhaps. But they didn't get the message. They missed it. It was a little too subtle for his brain dead followers. So alas, we have Islam to this day, even if Muhammad tried to make some small amends for all the misery he brought into the world by admitting he was a false prophet so that it would end at that point. Surely we would have severed his aorta or cut, severed, cut, same thing. I think I need to take a breather here. Before I get into these amazing scientific miracles, of which there are more than 1,000 in the Quran. I don't know how he's going to cover 1,000 verses in 4 minutes and 10 seconds, but I have confidence that he's going to do it because he proved Islam in this video. And this is his proof of Islam.
And not one of them is disproven by the science of today.
Not one of them, huh? Not one of those verses related to science in any way has been disproven by science today. Definitely not when the Quran says that Dhul Qarnayn found the sun setting in a muddy pool of water. That definitely has not been disproven by science today. It is 100% plausible that that Dhul Qarnayn did in fact find the sun setting in a muddy pool of water. Perfectly scientifically plausible. Science definitely has not disproven that the stars are objects that Allah uses to throw at demons or jinn who are trying to sneak up from earth into heaven. And that's why you see so-called shooting stars, is because that's Allah throwing a star, which is actually a massive, gigantic ball of gas millions of miles away from earth. He's throwing it at the jinn, and when it enters the Earth's atmosphere, it's that tiny, tiny, tiny little dot in the sky that you see shooting across the sky. Definitely not disproven by science of today. Science has definitely not disproven the fact that man is created from a substance that is spurted from between the backbone and the ribs. A drop of substance, which is the normal description of what we would today call seminal fluid. That it is formed between the backbone and the ribs. Science has definitely not disproven that. We have no idea what is in between your backbone and ribs, so it is quite possible that is in fact where semen or seminal fluid is produced. Allah could be right about that. We just don't know. Absolutely nothing in the Quran has been disproven by science of today. If you think otherwise, well, then you are
coward.
Just cowardly. Cowardly. How could you doubt the Quran and all its beautiful science?
The Quran is spiritual, but also intellectual, as it constantly challenges us.
Wait. He's not going to go into any examples? Like, literally? I'm going to let the whole thing play through here.
Conclusion that the Quran is the most eloquent literature to date. The Quran also has scientific and historical miracles. More than one.
Hold on. I got to pause here. Raman says, have fun spreading lies, losers, for you shall. Okay. I'm currently playing this video by a Muslim revert. Is that me having fun spreading lies? I shall spread those lies. What have I said that's a lie, Raman? I want to know. I want to know what I have said that's a lie. If you mean the lies of Lorenzo, sure, I give you that. I give you that I am inadvertently spreading his lies. But if you mean me, then give something specific.
1,000 verses in the Quran are related to science, and not one of them is disproven by the science of today. The Quran is spiritual, but also intellectual, as it constantly challenges us. The Quran also has no
Yep, he gave absolutely no example of the supposed scientific and historical miracles. His argument that the Quran must be from God is that it has his scientific and historical miracles. What are those scientific and historical miracles? We have no idea. He doesn't tell us. So I was going to wait until he gave one of these
historical
so-called
miracles. More than
historical examples to criticize this nonsensical idea. I mean, so the term scientific miracles is a contradiction in terms, but the idea is that it's not really a miracle, but because a miracle is something outside the laws of science, so it's a contradiction in terms. But what they really mean is that it was knowledge that was impossible to possess at the time of Muhammad. Problem is, everything they point to, numerous things happen. Only one of these things would happen on any given verse for it not to be miraculous, but usually most of these things happen. One, the verse doesn't say what they claim it says. Two, it was common, the verse reflects common knowledge of the day. Three, the verse is not scientifically accurate. And four, any reasonable person could have come to the same conclusion about physical reality at any point in human history. Therefore, there is nothing special about any of these so-called scientific foreknowledge would be a more proper term about. Now, when they say historical miracles, this is less common, but it is raised sometimes. What they mean is that the Quran gets history correct in such a way that no one else knew about it. And they have very, 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 very few examples of this. But one that they point to, the second most common, I think, that they point to, is that the Pharaoh at the time of the Exodus got salt in his lungs because he was drowned. So many problems with that because the residue found in the mummy is, of course, embalming fluid, has nothing to do with the way he died. There's zero evidence that Ramses II was drowned. The Quran doesn't give you a timeline to determine who that pharaoh was, and so on and so forth. Numerous problems with that. Or they say it's miraculous because the Quran supposedly says he was preserved, therefore it knew about mummification. Well, mummification was common knowledge even in Muhammad's time. One of the few things that people knew about Egypt was that they made mummies. There was even a black market for looted mummies from Egyptian tombs because they were thought to have miraculous powers, healing powers. So it was a well-known thing, right? But what the verse probably means when it says he was preserved is that he was not killed. It doesn't mean he was mummified later on. Now, the one they most commonly point to is the supposed fact that the Quran correctly calls the leader of Egypt at the time of Joseph king, and the Bible incorrectly calls him Pharaoh. Okay, so one, a king is a pharaoh is a king. When they started using the term pharaoh is irrelevant. Modern Egyptologists refer to all of the rulers of Egypt from the foundation of the nation up until the time of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, as pharaohs. They don't draw that distinction. That's problem number one. Problem number two, I already alluded to. The Quran doesn't have a timeline that would allow us to determine when Joseph lived. The only way they can get to something resembling a timeline is by making assumptions about what the biblical text says about when Joseph lived. Three, it is not clear when the change happened. It is a debated fact in Egyptology as to when they started to use the term pharaoh. It is quite possible that it was before the time of Joseph, according to the biblical timeline, or according to one of multiple different possible versions of the biblical timeline, because the biblical timeline isn't enough to precisely give a date either. So it is just total nonsense from any possible perspective, and it's the best thing that they can do. Phil gave an article there, Pharaoh saved in his body. Yeah, saved in his body or preserved in his body almost certainly means he wasn't killed. He was kept alive as either some sort of mercy or as a punishment to see his nation be, so they would see when his nation was destroyed. Either way, it most certainly means he was alive. That's the plain meaning of the Quranic text.
1,000 verses in the Quran are related to science, and not one of them is disproven by the science of today. The Quran is spiritual, but also intellectual, as it constantly challenges us.
I don't know if that's supposed to be an argument or not. It's spiritual, but also intellectual, as if things that are spiritual normally don't involve the intellect. Okay. Good argument.
Quran also has no contradictions, so for this reason, we are justified in claiming that the Quran indeed comes from God.
No, you're not. One, that's false. Two, that would not be a justified conclusion. I'm just going to click on a random comment. Snoopy says, not disproven, laughed at. There are no contradictions in this statement. Snoopy has not contradicted herself. Therefore, this comment must be from God. That is the logic. It can't apply just to the Quran, or you wouldn't be justified in making that conclusion. If you say, oh, this only applies to the Quran, that's called special pleading, and it is a logical fallacy, where you say, yeah, it's not generally true that anything without contradictions must come from God, but the Quran, if it doesn't have any contradictions, it must come from God. I don't think bigger problem, because that's a huge problem that it doesn't work. But another problem is that the Quran does have contradictions. Every Muslim, whether they realize it or not, believes that the Quran has contradictions because they believe in abrogation. Ooh, the magic formula of Allah that allows him to get rid of contradictions by saying he changed his mind. Well, he didn't really change his mind. He just revealed a false idea at first, and then revealed the correct idea later on. Yeah, gotcha. So obviously the Quran contains contradictions, but abrogation can only get you out of contradictions that are moral principles, because supposedly Allah's perfect moral law, because remember Lorenzo claims that Allah has perfect knowledge of what's good and evil and has revealed it to us. So Allah's perfect moral law, that's for all times and all places and all humanity, the instruction manual by which we live our life, and if we don't follow that instruction manual, we crash our car or whatever his stupid analogy is, contained errors, contained things that are false, contained things that would cause us to crash our car because, well, Allah felt like it. But even if for some idiotic reason we grant that abrogation is something that makes sense, which it doesn't, there's still other contradictions, which are about physical reality, historical reality, words said, all kinds of things. Those you can't get out of abrogation. If one surah says that Shaitan said this, and a different surah says, no, he said this, you can't say, well, that was abrogated, because it describes a historical event. There is a contradiction there. How many days were creation? 6, according to most of the verses of the Quran. But the one time that Quran is described that creation is described in detail, there are 2 days, plus 4 days, plus 2 days. I know that Muhammad was not very good at math, but that adds up to 8, not 6. There are 8 days of creation according to the detailed account of the Quran, 6 days according to the numerous statements it makes. These can't really be reconciled with one another. Of course, Muslims have a way to reconcile them. They say, well, those 2 days are included in the 4 days. Therefore, it's really only 4 days, even though there's absolutely nothing in the text to justify that. And that would be an incredibly stupid way of talking. Then we go to the Hadith. And they seem to say that there's 7 days of creation, 7 days of creation, 7 days of creation. 6 is not 7. 7 is not 8. 6 is not 8. This is a contradiction. This is a difference in the Quran. And so on and so forth. Now, I do think that there are lists that exaggerate the number of contradictions in the Quran, but there are at least about a dozen or so things which I think are very real contradictions, which there is no reasonable explanation for, other than the author of the text, 1, changed his mind, or 2, forgot what he had said before. Either or.
Accepting Islam means that you accept that there is an afterlife. But why should there be an afterlife to begin with? If there was an African boy of 12 years...
What? What? I thought you were proving Islam, right? I thought that you were proving Islam in 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Now you're going to argue that there's an afterlife, which is not a proof of Islam. You are now have concluded that Islam is true and are going to argue that the tenets of Islam are also true. Do you have no evidence that Islam is true? You just made a couple of statements. All you did is make a couple of statements with zero evidence behind them. And now you're going to go on and say, since we know Islam is true, we know there must be an afterlife. But why would that be the case? Well, if we had proof that there was an afterlife, that might be evidence for Islam. But by definition, we can't really have proof of the afterlife because it's not part of this life. It's not part of this physical reality. So it's impossible for this to be evidence for the existence of God, let alone the proof of Islam specifically. Oh, goodness gracious.
The Quran indeed comes from God. Accepting Islam means that you accept that there is an afterlife. But why should there be an afterlife to begin with?
Why should there be an afterlife to begin with? I don't know. He's going to tell us. For what purpose? None whatsoever.
If there was an African boy of 12 years old who died in his village from starvation, but there was also a 70-year-old man who died after being a drug dealer who lived in luxury all his life while causing harm to the world, would you think God is fair?
Okay. Oh, well, I should probably just let it play out.
Absolutely not. That is why we believe in a day of judgment. It's going to be a day in which no soul will be wronged.
So, why should there be an afterlife? Because otherwise, Allah would be unjust, I guess. So many problems with this, right? Problem number 1. How did he define justice? He didn't. He just said this would be unjust. On what standard? Allah's standard? I have no idea. Does that answer your question, Islamic knowledge? Yes, it's live. I am live. I am speaking to you now. So continuing, right? That according to him, it would be unjust. But what is the standard of injustice? He doesn't give it to us. 2. Problem number 2. If God allowed for injustice, would that make God unjust? Well, he says no because, well, he says yes, except if there's an afterlife, then that's not the case. But hold on, that's not actually true. God could allow for evil and still be perfectly just if he set up the rules such that no one had an unfair advantage, right? Justice means that everyone has equal access to the law, to what we call justice, equal access to pursue what is right and wrong. It would actually still be just. In his example, a 12-year-old boy dies of starvation, and a drug dealer lives in luxury his whole life and dies in peace. That wouldn't make the world unjust. It would make maybe the drug dealers unjust, and maybe people in the world are unjust, and that's why the boy dies of starvation, because they're selfish and greedy and all kinds of other things. But that doesn't actually make the world itself unjust. You see the difference here? Allowing for people who have free will to make unjust choices does not make the world unjust. So that's problem number 2. Problem number 3, who said that God was all just? Who said that Allah was all just? That is just an assumption, a bad assumption that he is making, especially since if we read the Quran, Allah brags about being not just. He brags about being a deceiver. He brags about picking some people arbitrarily and punishing other people arbitrarily. And he even declares, if you don't sin, then I will destroy you and create a people who would sin against me. That does not sound like any sense of justice whatsoever.
Then the logical conclusion is that Allah was unjust.
That is the logical conclusion of the Islamic texts. But he says we must have an afterlife because otherwise Allah would be unjust, except Allah is unjust. So where is the problem? I don't see one.
And justice will be served. An afterlife also brings hope and optimism in the hearts of those who are struggling around the world.
That's true, but that's not an argument that there must be an afterlife, right? A sweepstakes gives hope and optimism to people who enter the sweepstakes. That doesn't mean that the sweepstakes is proof that there's an afterlife, or that is proof that the sweepstakes will pay out the prize, right? It could be a fraud. They might not pay out the prize, but it still gives hope and optimism to the people entering the contest. There have been many false sweepstakes in world history. Hey, a Ponzi scam. Ponzi scam gives hope and optimism to the people who invest in a Ponzi scam. They put in, let's say, $1,000, and they hope to get out $2,000 later on. They have hope and optimism. They believe in it, or they wouldn't have put the money in the first place. Does that prove that they get that money out? Obviously not. Yet that is the form of his argument, that because people have hope, therefore there must be an afterlife.
In fact, the afterlife is described in extreme detail in the Quran, and the reason why he does so is so that we make the afterlife our main priority and goal in this life.
Well, first of all, I think that's false. I think that's just flat out false. I do not think the afterlife is described in extreme detail in the Quran. It is described in the Quran. I'm not saying it's not there at all. And I guess extreme detail is somewhat subjective, but I only see small amounts of information. You know, a couple sentences here, a couple sentences there, lots and lots of commands about where you're going, you know, what to do here and now so that you get afterlife or are denied afterlife. But so what? That's not extreme detail, right? I can guarantee, I don't have the math, I haven't done the math, but I can guarantee there are more commands, more descriptions of what you do in this life than what it is like in the afterlife in the Quran. And I'm not saying that as a way of saying that Quran is wrong. I'm saying it as a way of saying this guy's wrong. His argument doesn't follow. He says the Quran is mostly about well, he doesn't say mostly. He just says it has extreme detail. But if it was primarily about the afterlife, then it should be primarily what it describes based on his argument, right? Because he said the reason it's primarily about the afterlife is it has lots of details. It could be primarily about the afterlife and only be a small percentage of the text, but it wouldn't be because it had extreme details.
Now, to say that revelation has come to us, it implies that we need someone or something to have brought the revelation.
Okay, you supposedly already proved Islam by making unverified statements that you didn't even bother to argue for about the Quran. But now he needs to get Muhammad in there because, as we all know, Muhammad is actually the god of Islam. So now just for no reason whatsoever, he talked about the afterlife, and now he's going to try to argue, well, since Muhammad brought the Quran, Islam must be true because the guy who brought the Quran couldn't be wrong about anything ever. And that's why we obey all of Muhammad's words right down to the letter as perfectly preserved to us 200 years after the time of Muhammad's death. And we basically ignore what the Quran has to say.
In Islam, we believe that Allah has sent different prophets to mankind in different times and places. But we believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a prophet for the whole of mankind. The reason why we think
Hey, perfect example of ignoring what the Quran says, because the Quran explicitly says multiple times that Muhammad is only the prophet for his particular people group, for his tribe, for his language group, for his city, stuff like that. Because everyone else, according to the actual theology of the Quran, not according to the theology of Islam, but according to the actual theology of the Quran, everyone else in the entire world already had the perfect revelation from God, and he just hadn't gone around to giving it to the Arabs yet. And therefore, Muhammad was sent to fill in that tiny little gap that had not yet occurred.
That Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a prophet for the whole of mankind is because his miracle was the Quran.
What? What? Just going to let this one sink in here for a second. Just going to let it sink in. Muhammad, with the reason we believe that Muhammad was sent to all mankind is because his miracle was the Quran. Like, what exactly is the logic here? Yeah, his miracle, right? Not Allah's miracle. But because, in other words, he can't come up with any actual reason why Muhammad would be sent to all mankind. So he says, we believe that Muhammad brought the Quran, therefore he was sent for all mankind. We believe that Jesus brought the gospel or Injil, therefore he was not sent to all mankind. If you can't see the difference, too bad, because I have no clue what the difference is. But this is the proof that Muhammad, Islam, is for all people and Jesus is not.
The Quran is a miracle that can be proven in any time and any place, while Jesus and Moses, may peace be upon them, made miracles that cannot be proven today.
So, okay. At least he did try to justify it. Quran is a miracle that can be proven in any time and any place. What is the proof that the Quran is a miracle? Oh, the scientific things are there. I won't tell you what any of them are.
The scientific argument, the scientific miracles in the Quran, is debunked.
But also, it's perfectly preserved, right down to the letter. Or so I was told, and didn't bother to investigate anything. And the proof of this is the Birmingham manuscript, which is the complete Quran, and it doesn't vary in any way from the modern Quran, except it's only 4 pages and does have textual variants. Oh, and by the way, the Quran talks about theological matters, and it's intellectual at the same time. This is a miracle. Nothing could possibly be spiritual and intellectual at the same time. Only the Quran. Certainly not my video, because it is not remotely intellectual. Or spiritual, for that matter. What was that on? Oh, and historical miracles. Someone knew something about the past that they could not have possibly known about the past, except that the past is inherently knowable because it could be handed down. This is the proof of Islam that stands up in any time, in any place. And by the way, it could be proven in the 7th century by the scientific miracles, which had not yet been discovered or invented, as is actually the case. How was it proven in the 7th century or the 8th century or the 9th century or the 10th century? Any time, any place. How is it proven today in a remote island of uncontacted people who have never had have never experienced the technological advances of the modern age? Well, apparently it can be proven there as well. How? We don't know. No way, no time, no place has the Quran ever been proven about anything. There's nothing remotely miraculous about the Quran. Actually, I take that back. There's one thing that's actually kind of miraculous about the Quran, and that's that anyone who has read this text believes it. Because it would require some massive spiritual forces to cause anyone to read this text and come to the conclusion that it's from God. It is one of the worst, most pathetic texts in the history of humanity from any reasonable standard, and yet Muslims blindly repeat that it's true. Now, most of them don't know, right? Most of them can't read Arabic. Most of them have no clue what the actual text says and what a disaster it is, how it would sound like broken English or broken whatever language you speak if you knew Arabic. But some do, right? Some are able to read the Quran and they still come to the conclusion that it's beautiful and miraculous and blah, 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 blah. That's almost miraculous that they believe this nonsense. That's the closest thing to an actual argument for the Quran that I can come up with.
So their miracles were limited to a specific time and place. Now you could also ask, was Muhammad...
Oh, by the way, you can test miracles if you use the proper tool, which is historical inquiry. Just a little aside there.
Muhammad actually a prophet? To this question, there are three answers. He was either lying, he was mad, or he was telling the truth.
No, those are not the only three possible answers. Let me rewind that.
Place. Now you could also ask, was Muhammad actually a prophet? To this question, there are three answers. He was either lying, he was mad, or he was telling the truth.
So he's trying to do a Lord lunatic or liar here, but he's leaving out some possibilities, which don't apply in the case of Jesus or C.S. Lewis's famous argument, but could apply in Muhammad's case. He was deceived, right? You don't have to be a liar or a lunatic to be deceived. You can be deceived without being either of those three things. It could be legendary. It could be invented, 200 years after the time of Muhammad, when the Hadith literature are being written down, or the Seer literature being written down. That is a possibility. There are also mixed possibilities, right? He could sometimes be telling the truth in that he was sometimes be deceived, sometimes flat out lying, sometimes legendary development. There are a lot of possibilities. It's not just a cut and dry thing. The reason it is a viable argument for Christians or C.S. Lewis, although I wouldn't technically recommend using it because there are nuances, but the reason it's viable for Christians is because we know that the Gospels are reliable from a historical standpoint. That is established fact, that they are generally accurately describing what happens there. The only possibilities are that the authors are lying about things, or that Jesus made these claims but was insane, or that Jesus deceived the authors, right? So the authors were deceiving, Jesus was deceiving, Jesus was mistaken, or, he was a lunatic, he was actually crazy. Or, of course, the other possibility that Jesus is exactly who he says is. This does not work for Muhammad. One, the Quran's not supposed to be Muhammad's words. That's going to give you a big problem right away, right? The Gospels purport to give Jesus his words. The Quran is supposedly not Jesus's words. I mean, it's supposedly not Muhammad's words. So you can't actually even start with the same analogy, even ignoring everything I said. But let's see. Let's see what he is going to do to roll these out.
First of all, Muhammad, peace be upon him, received his first revelation at 40 years old, which makes it so that before the first ever revelation, he lived a completely normal life. In this period of his life, before the first ever revelation, he was literally nicknamed the truthful and the trustworthy. But you could also say that he lied as he wanted power.
So far he hasn't said it. Well, okay, so he's made a claim, which I'm actually willing to grant, that before Muhammad started to receive revelation, he was a well-respected member of society. So what? As he just himself said, he could have changed from being trustworthy to lying. I mean, he went through all that, and then he says, yeah, but I didn't actually tell you anything, because he was saying truthful stuff in the past, or had a reputation of saying truthful stuff, which doesn't technically mean that he was. He could just be really good at lying, and people thought he was telling the truth. But he had a reputation telling the truth in the past. Then he started to receive revelation, and in my opinion, as outlined by the Seer literature, the revelation itself corrupted him and made him an evil person. He wasn't naturally that way. So what? How is that an argument that he wasn't a liar?
That also cannot be true, as he was offered by the most powerful leaders at the time anything he wanted just so he stopped preaching.
Okay, that's utter nonsense. That is just utter nonsense. Even the Islamic texts don't make that claim. They don't say, we will give you anything you want. Just please stop preaching. Yes, there are some hadith, again, written 200 years after the time of Muhammad, that say that leaders tried to bribe him in various ways, but not of absolutely anything you could ever imagine in the world. But even if their bribes were really good, right, we'll give you the equivalent of $100 million, and you'll never have to do anything the rest of your life. So what? That might not have been appealing, right? Muhammad might have wanted something they could not have possibly offered him, such as, say, their kingship. I want to be leader of this nation. I want to be ruler. I want to be the powerful one. I want to make all the decisions. They obviously did not offer Muhammad that possibility. If that's the only thing he desired, then whatever else they tried to bribe him with wouldn't matter. Possibility number two, he could have been delusional enough to think that their offer wasn't very good, even if it was great. Well, they're offering me 100 million. That's because I'm going to earn $1 billion on my own accord. This is a bad deal for me. So it does not follow that the fact, which is not remotely a fact, because it's written long after the time of Muhammad, and there is zero evidence of any of this interaction occurring from contemporary records, that Muhammad supposedly did not decline these offers means that he was a true or couldn't be a liar is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's not an argument at all.
Doesn't that show his sincerity? Also,
No, it doesn't show his sincerity. It could possibly show sincerity, but it could also show that he was so arrogant and conceited that he thought he could do better on his own, or that they weren't giving him what he wanted.
his character was described by many different people as impeccable. In fact, everyone sought his help, both Muslim and non-Muslim. These are not the qualities.
Oh, really? Give me one non-Islamic text that ever claims to have sought Muhammad's advice about anything. Oh, you don't have any? Because they don't exist. All you have is some Islamic histories, which Muslims don't consider reliable, written several hundred years after the time of Muhammad, that say isolated Jews and Christians sometimes ask Muhammad questions. That is not remotely what you are putting this out to be.
Of someone who is mad. Somehow an illiterate Arab man brought forth the Quran. For these reasons,
So, for evidence that Muhammad is not insane, he brought forth the Quran. And he was illiterate. Because all insane people are literate, apparently. All insane people don't know how to form sentences. All literate people don't know how to tell stories. All insane people don't know how to tell stories. All insane people couldn't have lived in the 6th century, 7th century. I mean, what is the argument here? For this to be a logical conclusion, these are things that have to be impossible of someone who is
his help,
insane.
Both Muslim and non-Muslim. These are not the qualities of someone who is mad. Somehow an illiterate Arab man brought forth the Quran.
Oh, I forgot. All Arab men can't be. No insane person is an Arab man. No insane person is illiterate. No insane person has ever brought forth any text that they claimed was from God. Oh, wait, that's kind of a classic tell of someone being insane, is that they think they're talking to God and bring forth revelation from God. Oh. So what exactly do you have as evidence that Muhammad's not insane? Now, I actually don't think this is a very good explanation for Muhammad because of actual evidence, but nothing this guy said gave any explanation. And most importantly, he's not addressing what I think is actually the primary source of Islam, and that's demonic deception. He's not even addressing that possibility. That's not insanity. It's not the same thing.
For these reasons, we are justified in believing that the Quran is indeed the word of God.
Wait. Even if he had made solid arguments, that would be reason to believe that Muhammad was a prophet, not that the Quran is indeed the word of God. Your supposed argument, did you forget what you were arguing? Your supposed argument that the Quran is the word of God is that it contains miracles that can be tested in any time, in any place, because it supposedly has foreknowledge of 20th century discoveries, which obviously can't be tested in the 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th, 10th, 9th, or 8th centuries. And now you're supposed to be arguing how Muhammad must be genuine, must be a true prophet, and you forgot what you were arguing, so you just gave a totally different conclusion. Good job. And potato sandwich also raised another possibility here that Muhammad's, which is actually backed by evidence. Muhammad's contemporaries called him the ear because he was well known for just spitting out whatever stories he heard around at the same time as revelation. So that's another possibility, right? That's another possibility. Muhammad genuinely believed he was telling the truth. He genuinely was not crazy. He genuinely was not deceived. He simply repeated stories that other people told because he thought they were true, and in many cases they were true, but he wasn't actually receiving revelation from God. Huh. Seems there's some other possibilities here, Lorenzo. Seems you have not considered all the logical possibilities, and you've thus formed an invalid conclusion because you tried to do it by elimination, but you have to eliminate everything to get one conclusion if you do it by elimination. No, different Lorenzo. This guy is way more coherent than our Lorenzo. Plus, our Lorenzo is like 70 years old. So, totally different guy. Coincidental on the name.
And that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was his final messenger. And in fact, being a prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, also made many different prophecies, which at the time made no sense.
Oh, so now he's going to give some new evidence for Muhammad. He's going to say that Muhammad made some good prophecies. Oh boy, everyone. You excited for this? We get to hear about all the true prophecies of Muhammad, which made no sense at the time in which they were revealed. Which I'm sure could be proven at any time in any place, because that is the criteria for this being a valid test of Muhammad being a universal prophet, right? That's what he said earlier. The proof that Islam is universal is that it can be tested at any time in any place, except he just said that these prophecies made no sense at the time of Muhammad, so they couldn't be tested at the time of Muhammad. In fact, they so couldn't be tested that they didn't even make sense. There were just words on a page that no one had any idea what they meant. Huh.
For example, he prophesied about the Arab Bedouins competing with one another in building the tallest buildings.
False. 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 You have added EST. He just said tall buildings. At least he said Bedouins. At least he got that part. But here's the problem. Burj Khalifa and other large buildings in Saudi Arabia or Dubai or the United Arab Emirates more broadly are not made by Bedouins. Good job. Good job understanding that the hadith is actually about Bedouins, but that's not who built these buildings. Huh. Whoops. Phil says pyramids are pretty tall, aren't they? Indeed they are. But as I explained last time, I'll be brief since I went through this one in some detail last time. According to the Islam, okay, first of all, this doesn't, he said that some things didn't make any sense at the time. It perfectly made sense at the time. People knew what those words meant. Yeah, he also forgot barefoot and naked. I guess he didn't want to say that part. Because, of course, they're not barefoot or naked. They're not barefoot, naked, or Bedouins, the people building these tall buildings. But here's the even bigger problem. Because although no one knew what this could possibly mean, hadith literature written at the same time as this hadith is being written down for the first time ever claim that it had already been fulfilled. That they had gotten so rich off of jihad that they literally had nothing left to do except compete in building tall buildings, which apparently was considered a mark of low class, being low class that you were trying to build buildings in Muhammad's mind, in his contemporary society's mind. Building these buildings meant that you had nothing useful to do. You were just wasting time and resources. And the hadith, which are written the same time as this hadith are being written down, say that it has already been fulfilled. Whoops.
He prophesied about the two seas that touch but do not mix.
What? Okay, this guy obviously has no clue about anything. Audience, did Muhammad prophesize about two seas that touch but do not mix? Okay, first of all, that wouldn't be a prophecy. That'd be a description of a physical reality, not a prediction of the future. But did Muhammad do this? Right? Is this something that Muhammad did? I'm going to wait until someone gives the correct answer. Well, maybe I won't wait if no one can come up with it. But I want to give you a chance. Did Muhammad prophesy about two seas that touch but do not mix? I think Phil gets the idea. I'm sure Phil knows, but make it explicit, Phil. Make it explicit what the problem is here. Professor Yaffel's correct. He has heard stuff and half remembered it. Well, yeah, okay. People are saying no, but why did Muhammad not do this? Where is this idea that he thinks is a prophecy of Muhammad actually come from? That's what I was trying to get at. Sorry, I wasn't clear. Is this something found in the hadith, in the words of Muhammad? All right, you guys aren't getting it. This is a verse of the Quran. Yeah, it was already known. It was observation. Nothing you said was wrong, but you weren't getting what I was. A barrier, right, which is dry land. That it's most likely dry land, or possibly, according to the tafsir, is about the invisible air that separates the sky sea from the land sea. But either way, it's something that is already believed, but it comes from the Quran. This cannot be a prophecy of Muhammad from an Islamic perspective. The Quran is supposed to be the literal words of God, not prophecies of Muhammad, not statements of Muhammad, not anything of Muhammad. So this guy heard some stuff and he's just repeating it without the slightest clue of what any of this stuff means. And as Phil pointed out, it's also false. That's salt water and sweet water or non-salt water do in fact mix. They just don't do so instantaneously. We have a term for where they meet. It's called brackish waters, which is the mixing of fresh water and salt water. So they do mix. It's just not instantaneous. That's all.
He also prophesied the time and the place in which Persia defeated Rome. In history, no other person's life has been preserved like.
All right, so he went through that one so quick I didn't realize that he was already going on
that touch but do not mix. He also prophesied the time and the place in which Persia defeated Rome.
So Muhammad prophesied the defeat of Rome by Persia. I won't make you guys wait for this one. This is another Quran verse. It's generally the only thing that Muslims point to in the entirety of the Quran as being prophecy and proving it's from God. So many problems with this. Let's start with the most obvious. The Quran is not written down until after the lifetime of Muhammad. The defeat of Rome does happen within the lifetime of Muhammad. This prophecy is written down after the event occurs. No miraculous knowledge needed for such a prophecy. Problem number 2. Muhammad gets it wrong, or the Quran gets it wrong, if we go by the normal interpretation of the verse. Because it uses an Arabic word, which is a plural form that can only refer to numbers between 3 and 9. So it would have to occur within 3 to 9 years after the qualifying event, which is Rome defeating Persia. Problem is, It was somewhere between 11, 13, 15 years, depending on exactly how you measure it, but definitely not within 9 years. So it's actually just flat out wrong. It uses an imprecise term and still gets it wrong. Problem number 3, the on-dotted Arabic, which is what the Quran would have been written in the time of Muhammad, is ambiguous. You literally cannot tell who defeats who according to the on-dotted version of the text. And there is a textual variant in a version of the Quran that says Rome defeats Persia. Like the defeated will be further defeated, basically. Instead of the defeated will be the victor. Because it's ambiguous without the vowels and the consonantal marks in the really crappy early version of Arabic the Quran would have been written in. So that's problem number 3. Problem number 4, even if this prediction was made, it wouldn't be much of a prediction whatsoever. It's something that would have been obvious to people in contemporary society because Rome and Persia were having an ongoing war with battles being won by both sides. It would not be surprising that the side that was just defeated would later win some other battle. It's not like some miraculous thing. It's like me saying that the Republicans have just won the presidency of the United States. But within the next 3 to 9 years, a Democrat will win the presidency of the United States. Not 100% guaranteed, but pretty darn likely that one of the next two presidential elections will be won by the Democratic Party. And if it's not, hey, apparently I can take credit even if it's 12 years from now or 16 years from now, because it's close enough, right? It's close enough that it's somehow miraculous. Not much of a prediction, not miraculous, gets the number wrong, is ambiguous in the original text, and is written down after the fact. If this had been totally proven wrong in such a way that you couldn't even remotely argue for it, it probably just would have been left out of the Quran, assuming it was even said by Muhammad in the first place. Then he also said the place, which is total nonsense. It doesn't say anything about the place. This is another one, a ridiculous argument that Muslims make, because it supposedly says the lowest point, but it's not actually talking about a geographic figure in any place in any way, and it doesn't occur at the Dead Sea anyway, which is the lowest place on earth. They say, well, it's somewhat near the Dead Sea, so that's what it means. Oh my goodness, this is pathetic. Who is squeezing Thaddeus to get the presidential results? You'll never know. All right.
In history, no other person's life has been preserved like the one of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
What kind of nonsense is that? Since I started kind of a little bit into it, let me replay it for you.
No other person's life has been preserved like the one of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
So another piece of evidence that Muhammad is a true prophet is the perfect preservation right down to the event of Muhammad's life. Because no person in human history has ever had biographies written 150 to 400 years after the time they died. And no other person in world history has people collected sayings of them. Yeah, there's a few problems with that. Lots and lots of important people from ancient history have biographies written about them, sometimes in much less time frame than Muhammad's. Biographies were written about him. But by the time they were written, it was obvious that Muhammad was an important person, right? Because Islam had spread, it had conquered large quantities of land. How is it a miraculous proof of Islam that people wanted to write biographies of the founder of a movement that conquered a large portion of the world? That's like saying it's the proof that Alexander the Great was a true prophet is that people wrote biographies of Alexander the Great after it was obvious that he had conquered much of the known world. Or the same about Julius Caesar, right? And biographies were written about Julius Caesar after he conquered much of the known world. Or Caesar Augustus, since he probably did more conquering. But either way, right? They both conquered, they both expanded Rome. Biographies were written about him. It's miraculous. Yay! And you know who has much better biographies written about him? that are more contemporary and more improbable that anyone would ever write a biography about him because he wasn't an important figure in his contemporary time? Jesus. 4 biographies written about Jesus within 40 years of his life, when he's just a failed, I'm using in quotes, don't get mad at me, he's a failed revolutionary leader who wanted to overthrow the Roman government. And then for some reason, 4 different people write biographies of him, and he becomes the most influential person in human history. That is actually, I'm not saying that's a perfect proof of Christianity, but that's actually a reasonable argument. Why did this happen if Jesus is just some failed messianic prophet, of which there were definitely many, because the contemporary sources tell us there were many such claimants? Only one of them is remembered today. And not only is he remembered today, the largest religion in the world was founded after him. But Muhammad, he did found a religion, right? It is extremely large, but he also conquered a lot of land, right? He also was a military political leader. It was obvious his importance. You see the difference? Jesus's importance is not obvious in his own lifetime from a secular perspective, whereas Muhammad's importance in his own lifetime is obvious. Yet, supposedly, Muhammad's the only person who ever had biographies written about him, so he must be a true prophet.
We know so much about him that we also knew on which side he used to sleep. His greatness has been recognized in history.
We know which side he used to sleep on. Or, more probably,
by many different figures.
Some idiot,
for example, the astrophysicist.
Some idiot. I'm sorry, I accidentally heard that next part, and so I was laughing at that. But some idiot made up which side Muhammad slept on because people were so helpless. I was trying to think of a good word. Helpless in this religion that they needed guidance on how to do everything from going to the bathroom to sleeping. Can get 5 seconds without pausing. I just don't want to. They made stuff up to answer the question about how we're supposed to sleep, how we're supposed to eat, what kind of food, where to go to the bathroom, how many stones to wipe ourselves with, and so on and so forth. That's not proof that he is a prophet. That's just proof that people were obsessed 200 years later.
We know so much about him that we also knew on which side he used to sleep. His greatness has been recognized in history by many different figures. For example, the astrophysicist Michael Hart, author of the book Top 100 Influential People of All Time. He
actually goes to Michael Hart, right? And he by himself showed why this book is meaningless. Astrophysicist wrote a book on astrophysics? No? On history? What is its qualification to judge who the most important figures in world history are exactly? Absolutely nothing. It's just his personal opinion. Oh, that's interesting. We've been through this book numerous times in the past. Let's just say in brief, it has been widely criticized by every historian imaginable as being incredibly stupid. He most likely chose Muhammad as the most influential person in human history, precisely to sell books. It worked. Muslims have been fawning over this guy for decades. There have literally been statues built of him in Islamic countries because he said Muhammad was the most influential person in human history. Muhammad was definitely a very influential person in human history. But influential doesn't mean good, doesn't mean correct, doesn't mean important. And his primary reason for picking Muhammad as the most influential, according to him, which is, again, he probably came to this conclusion of how to sell books before he even made the list, was Jesus founded Christianity, but he did not write the Gospels. He did not write the epistles. And therefore, he is not the sole founder of Christianity. But Muhammad founded Islam, and he wrote the Quran. Therefore, he is the sole founder of Islam. so the credit doesn't get split up among anyone. Muhammad is number one, alhamdulillah. According to Michael Hart, who did not convert to Islam, showed no interest in Islam whatsoever beyond this stupid book, is that Muhammad is the author of the Quran, and the Quran is highly influential. It's a direct contradiction of Islamic beliefs, and they celebrate this guy. He also happens to be an outspoken white nationalist, but they're probably okay with that since Muhammad was very white.
Places Muhammad, peace be upon him, as number one. We also have different figures who recognize his greatness. For example, Dr. Keith L. Moore, Lamartine, and Gandhi. For these reasons,
Keith Moore. Keith Moore. Keith Moore, for those who don't know, Keith Moore is the only scientist out of like 20 that they tricked into saying nice things about the Quran that refused to recant it. But he did not say anything nice about Muhammad. He said that the Quran has surprising knowledge about embryology. Is Keith Moore an important figure in world history? Of course he isn't, right? As Potato says, Keith Moore next to Gandhi. Which, by the way, these are not YouTube subtitles. These are burned in by
figures who
him.
recognize his greatness. For example, Dr. Keith L. Moore, Lamartine, and Gandhi.
He says Gandhi. Look how he spells it. He says Gandhi, and he spells it Gandhi, as in rhymes with candy, and it's spelled as if it rhymes with candy. These are his subtitles. This is not the YouTube subtitles. Here are the YouTube subtitles, which actually, despite him calling him Gandhi, figures out it's supposed to be Gandhi, right? YouTube spells it correctly. He spells it Gandy. And this is the proof of Islam. Now, I don't actually know what Gandhi said about Muhammad. I actually haven't heard this claim before, so I actually don't know what that's about. But let's just give him credit and say Gandhi actually said something nice about Muhammad. Who freaking cares? Is Gandhi infallible? No. Did he know Islam well? No. What is the relevance of this? Absolutely nothing.
For these reasons, I came to the conclusion that he had to have been telling the truth. Now, if everything that I said does make sense to you, and you came to the conclusion that indeed there is only one God that created the universe,
I did come to that conclusion, but not because of your video.
And that he sent different prophets, and that Muhammad...
I did conclude he sent different prophets, although you never even bothered to argue for that, so I certainly didn't conclude it from your video.
Peace be upon him, had to have been telling the truth.
I did not conclude that Muhammad had to be telling the truth. He probably was telling the truth sometimes, or at least saying what he believed to be the truth sometimes. I bet you there's not one person in the history of the world who has always lied. That doesn't give you the conclusion that Muhammad never lied, that he was never deceived, that he was never insane, that nothing was made up about him. So no, I don't come to that conclusion.
Then I personally invite you to Islam. Everything you do in Islam is for the sake of Allah.
He personally invites you to Islam, everyone. Everyone. He personally invites you to Islam. There's obviously not going to be any more argument in this, so I'll just play out the last 16 seconds. I don't want to be accused of cutting off his beautiful Dawah message.
Which will help you obtain absolute happiness. In fact, if we think about the celebrities of today that we think look so happy, what really happens is that most of them turn to drugs and alcohol. Some even take their own lives. So the only way to achieve absolute happiness is through God.
There you go. Say your Shahada, because celebrities are often drunkards and abusers of illicit drugs, and they're probably not very happy. So convert to Islam. You guys convinced? You convinced? So there's a lot of speculation about his motives here. I'm not going to speculate about his motives. He might genuinely believe Islam is the truth. But I am going to show you his channel, and you can draw your own conclusions based on the type of videos he's been making. So let me sort them by oldest to newest. It starts with this is the first video he ever made. Then he makes some shocking prophecies of Muhammad, how self-improvement led me to Islam. So this is probably his personal story of how he converted to Islam. I haven't watched any of these, right? So I'm just speculating based on the titles. Full guide on life for reverts, how Allah is making me successful and how he can make you too. So, he's talking about how this channel is growing, right? Because of Allah. Now, I'm just going to scroll through these slowly rather than reading every single title. But notice it. Let me know if you see a change in the type of content he's producing after this point, after those first 5 videos. Go ahead and put in chat what kind of content, what niche you think he is aiming for with the content he's been producing after those first couple videos, obviously pandering to Islamic audience. Oh, you're right. You probably can't read it. Sorry. It didn't occur to me that you probably couldn't read the words. All right, let me read some of the titles. All right. What have you achieved as a Muslim? Your business as a Muslim will never work if your purpose behind it is just to make money. This verse is so powerful, I had to share it. Hacks and tricks don't exist. This is the only way to achieve success. You can't get any work done because you keep burning out. You are increasing in sin passively because of this one thing you do. How to create the best Islamic routine possible. How to make 100,000 viewed Islamic videos on YouTube. Being impatient as a Muslim cost me $250. The best online halal business to start. Why you should become wealthy as a Muslim. Money won't make you attract higher quality women in Islam. Is the law of attraction Islamic? Don't give up. Allah has a plan. This drug you consume every day is keeping you down. What does this sound like? What kind of content does this sound like? And by the way, I skipped the most egregious title of all, which is a shame. How to become attractive as a Muslim, not just physically. Dawah enhancement, tater tot, wealth growing thing, standard motivational grift. Yeah, if you guys got it, this is the self-help niche. He created a couple of videos on why he thinks Islam is the truth, and then after that, it's all these self-help things or motivational speech, whatever you prefer. Now, to Muslims' credits, right? 329,000 people so far have watched his first video, and then like 20-ish thousand watched his other videos on Islam. All his self-help videos have like 1,000 to 3,000 views for the most part. So actually, he's totally failing, right? Now, 1,000 to 3,000 views is not a failure, but to go from 300,000 views to 1,000 views is definitely a failure, I would say. And no, I don't think they're paid views, Snoopy, because I personally was recommended this video. I'm sure YouTube has recommended a lot. So many people. Mary's back, just so you know. I'm sure YouTube has recommended this widely, and it's because this video is exactly like the one we just reviewed, is exactly what Muslims want to see. They want to see white, male, Western people who claimed they converted to Islam. That's actually all they care about. He could have said literally anything in this video, and they would have still liked this video. It would have still been pushed to a broad audience because Muslims would have been engaging with it at a very high rate. Since he went on to the type of content he actually wants to produce, I'm guessing, which is self-help content, he has not done very well. But it seems that so he pumped out a ton of these things, like 20 or 30 of them in a very short span of time. And then about 2 months ago, I think he finally realized this isn't working and started to do more content that is aimed at a Muslim audience, like the story of Khalid ibn Walid. And you can't balance your deen with your dunya, and you're never going to please everyone, so why care? Oh wait, that one he just released. That one's kind of more self-help. This one wasn't here yesterday, so I didn't actually realize that. I meant to say this one, how Allah increases your iman without you even noticing. So it went from several videos on Islam to a whole bunch of self-help videos that didn't do all that well, and now he's back to videos on Islam. You draw your own conclusions about what this means about his sincerity. But to me, kind of looks like he wants to have a large YouTube channel, and he figured out this is a good way to do it. I am going to reach out to Lorenzo. I am going to invite him to have a conversation. If he's genuine, well, I don't want to say 100% certain, but if he's genuine, I think it's fairly likely that he would want to have a conversation with me. And we did address this earlier. Looks like in his newest video, he still doesn't have a beard. So how much does he actually know about Islam? Well, he thought that the mixing of two C's was a prophecy of Muhammad, not a scientific miracle of the Quran. So he just knows a few things and is repeating them and not even doing so correctly, and Muslims don't care. But if he's not genuine and he just wants to get rich and famous, hey, he still might accept, right? He might say, well, this is an opportunity for me to get in front of more people. Let's do it. So I'm going to reach out. We'll see what happens. What I'm going to guess, he probably won't. He probably won't even reply to me. Most people I reach out to never even bother to reply to me, which is fine. They don't have to. But I'm guessing he's probably not interested in conversation, but I will try. I will see. And hey, maybe we'll watch one of his other videos another time, and maybe we can learn how to increase our Imam without even noticing it or whatever else. All right, we're going to wrap up here in a little bit. If you were not here at the start of it, let me remind, well, I guess not remind you if you weren't here at the start, since you don't know yet. I have created a brand new channel called Proof Texted. Encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to go over there and check that out. It'll be posting clips from my funny moments, right? Ideas, right? These are out of context, right? Proof texting is reading the Bible out of context. It's declaring that, for example, Jesus says the only God is the Father. Only true God is the Father. Therefore, Islam is true, that kind of thing, but also done by Christians, not just by Muslims. So the idea here is I take clips out of context from my videos, edit them in what I hope is a funny way, but realistically is probably just silly and stupid. Anyway, if you're interested in checking that out, I'll put a link to the first video in the chat. In the first video, we have Nadir Ahmed telling us why Jesus cannot be the prophet like Muhammad. Classic clip from about a year ago. If you don't know why, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Just go over there and check out what Nadir said about Allah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Martyr Mouse. I forgot the super chat. I had actually forgotten. I didn't do it right away because they came in like back to back, and then I actually did forget about it. But since you kindly reminded me, thank you very much, Martyr Mouse, for this super chat.
Brothers and sisters, why to lose this great opportunity? Remember, when the person is on his deathbed, the last minute, he will ask Allah Jalla wa'ala to be delayed for 1 second to do what? Not to pray, not to do other things, but to give sadaqah, because sadaqah you can give it just like this, in 1 second.
So Martyr Mouse, and I did read this earlier, and I thought it was a really good comment, so I'm glad you reminded me. A torn and faded CVS receipt is more miraculous and eloquent than the Quran. I would have to agree. More perfectly preserved too, right? More perfectly preserved right down to the letter. Carol agrees, a very good super chat. Thank you, Martyr Mouse, for your support. Cheeky Shiki says, I always say cheeky. I know it's shaky, but but I automatically try to make it rhyme. Why to lose? So we got why to lose, and we got thousands of apples. So good selection of super chats videos today. Potato sandwich says cries less practical value than toilet paper. You got to rephrase this. You would not drive a car without first reading the instruction manual. So toilet paper is a perfect instruction manual on how to wipe your butt. Therefore, Charmin is a true prophet. I think I got that logic right. Yeah. Genesis 50:20 says Khomeini may be dead. I have not heard that. Let's wait for confirmation before speculating, would be my suggestion. Because I think Osama bin Laden was declared dead like 4 times before he was actually killed. So you never know about these things, right? What if the Quran is written on toilet paper? It's a tough one. Then the Quran might actually be useful. Martyr Mouse says, don't squeeze the prophet. So if you don't know what that's a reference to, an old marketing campaign of Charmin was don't squeeze the Charmin. This is so perfect. Someone remind me of this. Put in the comments after I stop the video to make a short on the squeezing of Muhammad compared to the squeezing of Charmin. That is just too good of an idea, right? Since Muhammad was squeezed into revelation. I definitely want to do that. I have several other shorts that I want to do in the near future. The plan is to be back on Tuesday. Streaming with Mary, we'll be looking at the second part of the Jake debate on Tawhid, where he debated fellow Muslim and with Shia Muslim, whereas he's a Sunni Muslim from Ismaili sect, on who Allah is, and comes to the famous part where Jake is affirming that Allah descends from his throne, affirming that the throne is above the earth, but refusing to say Allah moves down because that is not something you can draw as a conclusion. And he says this all makes perfect sense. That's the conclusion of the debate, but we reviewed Jake's opening statement. It was quite interesting, I suppose. And next time we will review Kali Adnani's opening statement. Maybe he'll tune in. He tuned in right at the end of the other one and said review my opening statement. So that would be pretty cool if he tuned in. But either way, should be a very interesting and entertaining stream. It'll be called something like Jake the Muslim or Muta Metaphysician. Or sorry, Muslim Mutaphysician. I'll probably just put metaphysician, but Mutaphysician, you know what it really should be. Is utterly destroyed on Tawhid, something along those lines. Oh, you neat me. I think you meant beat me. I don't know who beat Mary, but shame on you for beating women. That's not nice. And if it was me, well, shame on me for beating Mary. Mutaposition. That's actually better. Than mutaposition. Oh, goodness gracious. Anyway, we'll be back on Tuesday for that. I'm going to try to work on some scripted videos this week, either shorts or long form content. It's been a long, long time since I posted long form content. Want to get back into doing that. I just need to resolve to do it because time is always an issue for sure. Edward says that Jake the Muta physician and Daniel Pikachu would be the best duo. I agree. Like, I accidentally called Jake Daniel a couple times in that video on Friday because the two just remind me so much of one of another. I will post shorts. You never highlight any of my surahs that I type here. Aren't you afraid of the torment of the grave? So sorry. So sorry. I did almost highlight this comment and then I forgot. I just subscribed and my computer caught fire. Maybe don't subscribe to my new channel. You might cause your computer to catch on fire. I don't know. You be the judge of whether the risk is worth it or not. Until we meet again, we will, in fact, close out with the words of Jake.
Pray this ceaselessly. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me.